Welcome to our program on Check21, brought to you by the Electronic Check Clearinghouse Organization, otherwise known as ECHO. The purpose of this program is to provide an overview of Check21, discuss the major provisions of the Act, and cover the minimum requirements for receivers of substitute checks. We've organized the program into two major sections. The first section focuses on the Act itself and includes an example of what a substitute check looks like. The second section addresses what every bank and processor must do to be in compliance with the Act. Before we get started, let me introduce you to our presenters. They are David Walker, CEO and President of ECHO, and Phyllis Meyerson, Senior Vice President, also of ECHO. Both individuals are experts on this topic as they have been instrumental in involving the industry stakeholders in this process and in leading the industry to an agreeable solution. Let's listen into their conversation as they discuss the Act and its major provisions.
Check21 will bring revolutionary changes to the check payment system, and now that it's been passed, banks can begin exchanging check images.
It's a myth. Check21 has nothing to do with image exchange. It uses image technology, but banks are not required to create or to accept check images.
But the Federal Reserve says that Check21 is designed to encourage the truncation of the paper check. How can it do that without mandating the receipt of electronic transactions?
Check21 is a new federal law that creates a replacement for the original paper check, and this replacement document is the legal equivalent of the original paper check.
You're saying that the new law validates the replacement of a paper check with another paper check?
That's right, and this new paper check, called a substitute check, must be accepted by everyone as if it were the original check.
You know, many people think that Check21 is about image exchange. It's really about replacing a paper check with a substitute check.
When the Fed proposed Check21 to Congress, it knew that many institutions would not be ready to accept electronic transactions. So it found a creative way to avoid mandating the receipt of electronic transactions while allowing each institution to make its own decision about whether to truncate paper checks.
That was a clever idea. They solved the pre-Check21 problem of needing agreements among all the parties as a prerequisite to truncate the check, while encouraging banks to implement a more efficient process at their own pace.
That's right. Under Check21, any bank can decide to truncate all of its checks so long as it replaces them with substitute checks. The experts tell us that the average check must be processed several times in its life cycle. And the Fed anticipates that the use of substitute checks can eliminate many processing steps, reduce the amount of time to collect and return checks, and reduce the cost of transportation.
Does that mean that bank customers that receive paper checks in their statements today will continue to receive paper checks in their statements under Check21?
Yes, they can continue to receive paper checks in their statements, but some of their checks may be substitute checks rather than their original paper check.
That sounds like it could be pretty confusing to the customer. Tell me more about this substitute check and what it looks like.
Here is an example of a consumer check. It's not an actual check, just an example. It's written to the North Pole for holiday goodies. And this is what its replacement substitute check looks like.
It looks like an image of the original check is printed on the front of the substitute check. So when the bank's customer receives one of these in her statement, she will notice that the check looks a little differently, but she will also have a picture of the actual check that she wrote.
That's correct. But this is where the confusion comes in. Check21 uses image technology to create substitute checks, but it does not validate the exchange of check images.
It also looks like the image of the check is somewhat smaller than the size of the original check. Phyllis, you are a member of the A&S X990 work group that developed the new standard for substitute checks. Tell me more about the requirements for the substitute check.
The front of the substitute check includes an image of the original check and additional information, such as the bank that truncated the check, the bank that created this particular substitute check, the legal legend, and other information. In order to fix both the image and the other information on the substitute check, the image has to be shrunk. The image of the consumer check is about 97% of its original size, and a commercial check is about 67%. The image of the check also includes a picture of the original MICA line. But that picture of the MICA line does not meet processing standards. This requires the addition of a new microline on the substitute check.
And what about that 4 in position 44?
One of the technical problems of substitute checks was the ever-shrinking image. As checks are converted and reconverted multiple times, the size of the image on the substitute check will continue to shrink, rendering it too small to use.
The value in position 44 on the microline addresses this problem?
Yes. The Act requires that substitute checks follow industry standards, and X990 requires every substitute check to have a 4 in position 44. This puts all parties on notice that the check they received is a substitute check rather than an original check.
So the 4 in position 44 tells the receiving parties that the image has already been shrunk and that it should not be subsequently reduced again.
That's right, and it also provides a means for banks to identify the substitute check as they flow through their processes.
Let's take a moment here and recap what we've just heard. First, Check21 is not image exchange, but it does encourage truncation by replacing an original check with a substitute check. We also saw a sample substitute check document and learned that the information on the front of the original check also appears on the front of the substitute check. Furthermore, the substitute check also includes a microline. Last, we learned that all substitute checks must be identified with a 4 in position 44 of the microline.